The air in my apartment was stale, thick with the ghosts of cheap meals and the cloying scent of desperation. It smelled of cabbage and failure. Each breath felt like I was inhaling the very essence of my predicament, a suffocating dust of powerlessness that settled deep in my lungs. Outside, the city of Viridia hummed with a life I was no longer a part of. Its distant sirens and the rumble of traffic a mocking soundtrack to my silent panic. The single window, smudged with the grime of a neighborhood that had long since given up, offered a view of a brick wall, its mortar crumbling like my resolve. This room, this tiny box of existence, had become my cage long before the real one was being prepared. My world had shrunk to these four walls, the peeling floral wallpaper, a constant, taunting reminder of a time when I thought beauty was something accessible, something I might deserve. Now, the faded roses seemed to mock me, their once cheerful pinks muted to a bruised purple. A single suitcase lay open on the lumpy mattress, a pathetic collection of my life's essentials packed and repacked a dozen times in the last 24 hours. A few worn sweaters, a pair of sturdy shoes, the nursing textbooks I couldn't bear to leave behind, and a framed photograph of my mother, her smile a beacon from a past I could barely remember. Everything I owned, everything I was, reduced to a weight I could carry on my back as I ran. The source of my terror had a name, Julian Van Croy, a man whose smile was as thin and brittle as a pane of ice, and whose touch felt like a violation, even when it was meant to be kind. Our families, or rather his family, and what was left of mine, had decided our union was a perfect solution. For them, it was a transaction. His family's influence would erase the mountain of debt my father had left behind when he died, a debt that had hung over my head like a guillotine since I turned 18. For me, it was a life sentence. The wedding was in 3 days. 3 days until I ceased to be Alara Vance and became a possession. Another pretty object in the Van Croy collection. Panic was a living thing inside me, a frantic bird beating its wings against my ribs. I'd tried reasoning with my aunt, the last remaining family I had. She had looked at me with eyes full of weary pity, her shoulders slumped under the weight of her own compromises. "It's the only way, Alara," she'd said, her voice raspy. "He'll take care of you. We'll be safe." But her definition of safety and mine were worlds apart. Hers was the absence of debt collectors at the door. Mine was the freedom to breathe, to choose, to not flinch when a man entered the room. Julian made me flinch. He enjoyed it. A sharp, insistent knock rattled the flimsy wood of my apartment door. My heart slammed against my sternum, the bird of panic threatening to claw its way up my throat. "Alara? Darling, are you in there? It's me." Julian's voice. It was smoother than silk and twice as treacherous, a sound designed to soothe and charm while hiding the steel trap beneath. I squeezed my eyes shut, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a whimper. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be at a fitting, a pre-wedding ritual he'd described with sickening relish. He was early, or I was late. My escape plan, fragile as it was already unraveling. "I know you're in there, Alara," he called again, the silken tone fraying at the edges with impatience. "The landlady said she saw you come up. Open the door. We have things to discuss." I scrambled backward, away from the door, my eyes darting around the tiny room as if the walls themselves might offer an escape route. The fire escape. It was rusted and precarious, overlooking a narrow, refuse-strewn alley 4 stories down. But it was my only chance. My hands shook so violently, I could barely grasp the latch on the window. The metal screamed in protest as I forced it upward, the sound deafening in the sudden silence from the hallway. He must have heard it. The knocking escalated to pounding. Ilara! What are you doing? Open this door right now. Do not make me break it down. The threat was real. He had a temper that ignited without warning, a rage that he took great pains to hide from his influential parents, but unleashed on those he considered beneath him. And I was, in his eyes, irrevocably beneath him. I threw my leg over the sill, my worn sneaker scraping against the brick. Cold, damp air hit my face, carrying the stench of garbage from the alley below. I didn't look down. I couldn't. I grabbed my suitcase, my knuckles white, and hauled it through the opening before slinging the strap of my purse over my shoulder. The pounding on the door became a splintering crack. He was breaking through. My feet found the iron slats of the fire escape, and for a terrifying moment, the entire structure swayed under my weight. I clung to the railing, rust flaking under my desperate grip. Below, the alley looked like a chasm. I had to go. Now. I moved as fast as I dared, my suitcase banging against the metal stairs with each clumsy step, the noise echoing like gunshots in the narrow space. I heard the crash of my apartment door giving way, followed by Julian's roar of fury. "You little bitch! You think you can run from me?" His voice spurred me on. I practically fell down the last flight of stairs, landing hard on the cracked pavement of the alley. My ankle twisted, and a sharp pain shot up my leg, but I ignored it. Adrenaline was afire in my veins. I scrambled to my feet and ran, bursting out of the alley onto the main street. A frantic, gasping mess. Cars swerved, horns blared. I was a wild animal loose in a world of steel and glass, and I didn't care. I just needed to get away. I could hear his footsteps pounding the pavement behind me, closing the distance. He was faster, stronger. I was running on sheer terror, a fuel that would burn out quickly. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw him, his handsome face contorted into a mask of pure rage, his perfectly tailored suit no longer hiding the monster beneath. He was only a few yards away. In a final, desperate act, I veered off the sidewalk and into the street, directly into the path of an oncoming car. Not just any car. It was a long, black sedan, the kind of vehicle that seemed to absorb the light around it, its windows tinted to an impenetrable darkness. It moved with a silent, predatory grace, and I had just thrown myself in front of it. Tires shrieked against the asphalt, a sound that seemed to tear the very air apart. The car stopped, its massive chrome grille inches from my knees. For a second, the world went silent. My own ragged breathing, the pounding of my heart, Julian's approaching footsteps, it all faded into a roaring in my ears. I stood frozen, my hand outstretched as if I could hold the vehicle at bay, my eyes locked on the dark windshield that reflected my own terrified face. Then, the back door clicked open. It didn't swing wide, but opened with a smooth hydraulic hiss, an invitation into the darkness within. A man's voice, low and calm and laced with an authority that vibrated in my very bones, cut through my panic. "Get in." It wasn't a question or a suggestion. It was a command. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, my fear of Julian warring with the primal fear of the unknown. But then Julian's hand clamped down on my shoulder, his fingers digging into my flesh like talons. "Going somewhere, darling?" He sneered, his breath hot and sour against my ear. That was all it took. I ripped my arm from his grasp and scrambled into the car, pulling my suitcase in behind me without looking back. The door closed with a solid, definitive thud, sealing me inside and shutting out the world. The interior was a cocoon of black leather and polished wood, smelling of wealth and something else. something faintly metallic and dangerous. I pressed myself against the far door, my chest heaving, as the car pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving Julian standing in the street, his face a perfect picture of impotent fury. I was safe. Or, I had simply traded one cage for another. I finally dared to look at my rescuer. He sat opposite me, not beside me, in a spacious interior that felt more like a private lounge than a car. The faint glow of the dashboard lights cast his face in shadow and light, carving sharp angles from his cheekbones and jaw. He was impossibly handsome in a way that was almost brutal, his features too severe to be merely called attractive. A dark, perfectly tailored suit jacket was stretched across broad shoulders, and a crisp white shirt was open at the collar. His hands rested on his knees, large and still, but they radiated a sense of immense coiled power. But it was his eyes that held me captive. They were dark, almost black, and they watched me with an unnerving intensity, a gaze that wasn't curious but assessing, as if he were cataloging my every weakness. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't answer immediately. His gaze flickered down to my hands, which were clenched into white-knuckled fists in my lap, then back to my face. "My name is Dante. Dante Moretti." He said it as if the name itself should mean something to me. It didn't. "And you are Alara Vance." Ice flooded my veins. He knew my name. How could he possibly know my name? I hadn't said a word. My purse, which held my ID, was zipped shut on the seat beside me. The panic I thought I'd left on the curb with Julian came roaring back, colder and sharper this time. "How do you know my name?" I demanded, trying to inject a strength I didn't feel into my voice. A flicker of something amusement, perhaps crossed his face, so fleeting I might have imagined it. "I make it my business to know things." His voice was a low rumble, the sound of gravel rolling downhill, especially when a terrified woman throws herself in front of my car. He gestured toward the front of the car. I followed his gaze and saw a man in the passenger seat, his face briefly illuminated as he spoke quietly into a small device in his ear. The man, broad and stoic, nodded once without turning around. Information was being relayed, processed, delivered. In the few moments I had been in this car, they had already found out who I was. The efficiency was terrifying. It spoke of a level of resources and organization that was far beyond anything I could comprehend. As the car made a smooth, unhurried turn, I glanced out the back window. The street where I had escaped was gone, but the sight that replaced it sent a fresh wave of fear through me. Behind us, moving in perfect, silent synchronicity, were two more identical black SUVs. We were not just in a car, we were in a motorcade. A procession. I wasn't just being given a ride, I was being escorted, taken. I turned back to Dante, my heart hammering. "Where are you taking me?" "Somewhere safe," he said, his eyes never leaving my face. His gaze was like a physical weight, pressing down on me, leaving me pinned. "Safe from what? From whom?" I asked, though I already knew the answer to the second question. "From the man you were running from," he stated simply. "Julian Van Croy, fiancé by arrangement, heir to a minor shipping concern with major debts. A man who likes to hurt things smaller than himself." Every word was a hammer blow, a confirmation of how little I understood the situation I had thrown myself into. He knew everything. The arranged marriage, the finances, Julian's vile nature. This wasn't a random rescue. It couldn't be. Power. But what was it? "Why?" I managed to ask, the word barely a breath. "Why are you doing this?" He leaned forward slightly, the subtle movement shrinking the space between us until the air crackled with intensity. The faint, clean scent of expensive cologne mixed with the leather, a dizzying combination. Because, he said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming a resonant purr that vibrated through the seat. I was on my way to a business meeting. A meeting I am now late for, and I do not like to be late. Your fiancé, by creating this scene, has inconvenienced me, and I do not tolerate inconvenience. It was the most terrifying and absurd reason I had ever heard. He had upended my life, pulled me into this rolling fortress of black steel and tinted glass, simply because he had been inconvenienced? It made no sense. There had to be more. People like him, people with fleets of cars and instant information, didn't act on whims. They acted on purpose. I looked at him, really looked at him, trying to see past the intimidating facade. There was no warmth in his expression, no hint of pity or compassion. There was only a calm, chilling certainty, a possessiveness in his gaze that was entirely different from Julian's petty ownership. Julian wanted to own me like a trophy. This man, Dante, looked at me as if he had just acquired a rare and fascinating artifact, something he had no intention of ever letting go. We drove for what felt like an eternity, leaving the grimy, familiar streets of my neighborhood behind and moving into a part of the city I had only ever seen in magazines. Here, the buildings were clean and tall, the streets were lined with manicured trees, and the air itself seemed thinner, cleaner. We passed through a set of immense wrought iron gates, the family crest, a snarling wolf's head, gleaming in the afternoon sunday. A long, winding driveway curved through a landscape of impossible green, past fountains and statues, leading toward a house that wasn't a house, but a palace. It was a sprawling mansion of pale stone and dark slate, a fortress of modern architecture that somehow managed to look both elegant and brutally imposing. It was built into the side of a hill, overlooking the entire city, a king's vantage point. As the car pulled to a stop before a massive oak door, the man from the front seat, the one I now recognized as a bodyguard, was already there, opening my door. The stoic man's name was Marco, I would learn later, and his loyalty to the man beside me was as absolute and unthinking as gravity. I stepped out, my worn sneakers sinking into a plush Persian rug that had been laid out on the stone steps. The sheer scale of the place was disorienting. I felt like a stray insect that had wandered into a cathedral. Dante emerged. From the other side of the car, his height and presence seeming to expand to fill the space. He walked toward me, stopping just a foot away. "Welcome to my home," he said, the words a simple statement of fact, yet they carried the weight of a proclamation. "You will be safe here." He led me inside. The interior was even more breathtaking than the exterior. A cavernous foyer with a soaring ceiling, a grand staircase that swept upward into shadows, floors of polished black marble that reflected our images like a dark lake. It was beautiful, but it was a cold beauty. The air was still and silent, heavy with the scent of lemon oil and old money. There were no photographs, no clutter, no signs of a life lived. It was a museum, a mausoleum, a perfectly curated display of power and wealth. And now, it was my prison. A gilded cage, far more luxurious than my squalid apartment, but a cage nonetheless. Dante led me up the grand staircase, his footsteps silent on the marble, while my own worn shoes made small, scuffing sounds that seemed to echo in the vast space. I was acutely aware of my shabby clothes, the cheap fabric of my jeans, and the frayed cuffs of my sweater. I was a smudge of imperfection in this pristine world. We walked down a long, wide hallway lined with closed doors, the walls adorned with art that was probably priceless. Dark, moody paintings of stormy seas and brooding landscapes. Nothing cheerful, nothing bright. He stopped before a set of double doors and pushed them open, revealing a suite of rooms that made my tiny apartment look like a closet. A massive bedroom was dominated by a four-poster bed draped in cream-colored silk. An adjoining sitting area had a plush white sofa and a fireplace of carved marble. A third door, I presumed, led to a bathroom. The entire space was bathed in soft light from a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city sprawling below. It was the kind of view people paid millions for. A god's-eye perspective on the world. "This will be yours," Dante said, his voice pulling me from my awestruck trance. He walked over to a large walk-in closet and opened the doors. It was empty, save for a single plush white robe hanging on a hook. "Some things have been arranged for you. They should be here shortly. Anything else you require, you need only ask Marco." He gestured back toward the hallway, where the silent bodyguard stood sentinel. I hadn't even heard him follow us. He was a shadow, ever present and watchful. I don't understand," I stammered, turning to face Dante. He had moved to stand in front of the massive windows, his silhouette stark against the bright sky. He looked like a king surveying his domain. "What is this? What do you want from me?" He turned slowly, his dark eyes pinning me in place. "What I want, Alara, is for you to be safe. For now, that is enough." "Safe?" I echoed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. I was running for my life, and I jumped into a car with a complete stranger who knows my name, has a private army, and lives in a fortress. Forgive me if I don't feel particularly safe. For the first time, a genuine smile touched his lips. It was a small, dangerous thing, a predator's smile that didn't reach his eyes. "A fair assessment," he conceded. "You are intelligent. That's good. It will make this easier." "Make what easier?" I pressed, taking a hesitant step toward him. "You can't just keep me here. It's kidnapping." "Is it?" he countered, his voice deceptively soft. "Did I force you into my car? Or did you enter willingly to escape a man who was about to drag you back to a life you were desperate to flee? A man, I might add, who will not stop looking for you. A man whose family has certain unpleasant connections. You are in more danger than you know, Alara. Out there," he gestured to the city below, "you are a target. In here, you are under my protection." His words hung in the air between us, a chilling tapestry of logic I couldn't deny. He was right. Julian wouldn't give up. He would see my running away as an unforgivable act of defiance. His pride would demand retribution. And I had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. My aunt was a part of the trap, not a way out of it. I had a few $100s saved, enough to last a week if I was lucky. I was utterly, completely alone. "So what's the price?" I asked, my voice hard. "Everything has a price. What's yours?" He closed the distance between us in two long, silent strides. I had to tilt my head back to look up at him, the sheer size of him overwhelming. He reached out, and I flinched, but his touch was surprisingly gentle, as he brushed a stray strand of hair from my cheek. His fingers were warm against my cold skin, the brief contact sending a jolt through my system. Par. That was equal parts fear and something else, something I refused to name. "The price," he said, his voice a low murmur, "is that you stay. You stay here, with me. You don't run. You don't hide. Powers. You belong to me now." The words were possessive, absolute, the kind of statement that should have sent me screaming for the door. But beneath the chilling claim of ownership, I heard an undertone of something else. A promise. It wasn't the leering ownership of Julian, who wanted to possess my body and break my spirit. This was different. This was territorial, protective, as if he were claiming a lost, valuable thing he intended to keep safe at all costs. Before I could respond, there was a soft knock at the door. Marco entered, followed by two women in discreet black uniforms. They carried an armload of boxes and bags from designers whose names I only knew from glossy magazines. They laid them respectfully on the bed, a treasure trove of silk, cashmere, and leather. "Your things," Dante said, his gaze still locked on mine. "Rest. Eat. We will talk more tonight." And with that, he turned and left, Marco and the women following him out. The door clicked shut, and I was alone in the opulent silence. I walked over to the bed and touched the fabric of a deep blue cashmere sweater. It was softer than anything I had ever felt. It was a beautiful bribe, a silken chain. I sank down onto the edge of the mattress, the sheer luxury of my new prison overwhelming my senses. I had escaped Julian, only to be captured by a man far more powerful and infinitely more dangerous. A man who looked at me not as a bride or a business deal, but as a territory he had just claimed. And the most terrifying part was the small, treacherous flicker of relief I felt, a tiny, shameful voice in the back of my mind that whispered I was finally, truly safe. Hours passed in a surreal haze. I showered in a bathroom that was larger than my old kitchen. The water pressure, a decadent luxury. The towels, thick and impossibly soft. I found toiletries laid out. Expensive brands in heavy glass bottles that smelled of jasmine and sandalwood. I dressed in a simple pair of black silk trousers and the blue cashmere sweater, the clothes feeling alien against my skin. They were a costume, a role I was being forced to play. The woman who belonged in this house was not the same woman who had crawled out of a grimy window that afternoon. I wasn't sure I could become her. A light knock preceded the arrival of a maid with a tray of food. It was a simple meal of roasted chicken, vegetables, and fresh bread, but it was prepared with a skill I'd only ever seen on cooking shows. I ate, not because I was hungry, but because my body needed fuel. My mind was racing too fast to register taste. With every bite, I felt my old life slipping further away, replaced by this strange, gilded reality. As dusk settled over the city, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and fiery orange, Dante returned. He had changed out of his suit into a dark gray Henley that stretched across his chest and simple black trousers. He looked less like a corporate titan and more like what he was, a predator at rest. He carried 2 glasses and a bottle of deep red wine, which he set on a small table in the sitting area. "Join me," he said, his voice softer than before, but still holding that core of command. I sat stiffly on the edge of the white sofa, my hands clasped in my lap. He poured the wine and handed me a glass, his fingers brushing against mine. The jolt was there again, a spark of electricity I tried to ignore. He took a seat in the armchair opposite me, the space between us feeling both vast and intimate. "You are wondering why," he began, not as a question, but as a statement. He swirled the wine in his glass, his dark eyes watching the liquid vortex. "Why you? Why any of this?" I nodded, unable to find my voice. "I told you that your fiancé inconvenienced me." "That is true," he said, taking a slow sip of wine. "But it is not the entire truth. The truth is, I understand what it is to be trapped." He fell silent for a long moment, his gaze distant, lost in a memory that was clearly painful. The air in the room grew heavy with unspoken history. I waited, holding my breath. "When I was a boy," he finally continued, his voice low and rough with emotion, My mother was a beautiful woman, full of life. She loved music, she loved to laugh. But she was born into a world that saw her as a commodity. My father, he was not a good man. He was powerful. And he was cruel. He married her to secure an alliance with her family. He owned her, just as Julian intended to own you. My breath caught in my throat. I saw a flicker of the boy. He must have been in his guarded eyes, a vulnerability so profound and well hidden that seeing it felt like a trespass. I watched him break her, Dante said, his voice flat, devoid of all but a deep ancient pain. Slowly, day by day, he chipped away at her spirit until there was nothing left but a beautiful, empty shell. He controlled everything who she saw, where she went, what she wore. Her laughter faded, then her smile. One day, I came home from school and found her gone. She had taken her own life, rather than endure another day in his cage. He stared into his glass, his knuckles white around the stem. I was 16. I was powerless to stop it. I swore on that day that I would never be powerless again, and I swore that I would never, ever stand by and watch a man break a woman like that. He lifted his head, and his eyes, raw with the memory, found mine. When I saw you in the street today, with that look of pure terror on your face, and I saw him, I saw my father. And in you, he paused, his gaze intensifying. I saw her, not her fragility, but her desperation to be free. And I could not, I would not, let him drag you back. The confession settled over me, a heavy, intricate blanket of understanding. It wasn't about inconvenience. It wasn't a whim. It was a crusade. A ghost from his past had reached out and pulled me into its orbit. My fear began to recede, replaced by a wave of something far more complex, a reluctant empathy, a dangerous connection. I'm sorry, I whispered, the words inadequate. About your mother. He gave a short, sharp nod, dismissing my sympathy as if it were an irrelevance. It was a long time ago. It taught me a valuable lesson. Power is the only thing that matters. It is the only true form of safety. Julian Van Croy has a sliver of borrowed power. I have the real thing, which is why he will be dealt with. Dealt with? I asked, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. What are you going to do? I am going to remove him from your life, Dante stated, as if discussing the weather. Permanently. The debt your family owes his will be paid. The marriage contract will be nullified. He will never touch you, or speak to you, or trouble your thoughts again. I will handle it. The finality in his tone was absolute. It was both a promise of salvation and a threat of terrible violence. I thought of Julian, of his smug cruelty and the casual bruises he'd left on my arm during our last discussion. The thought of him being gone, truly gone from my life, was a relief so profound it was almost painful. Power. But I was also terrified of what handling it entailed. Dante Moretti was not a man who wrote strongly worded letters. And then what? I asked quietly. After you've handled him? Then, he said, leaning forward again, his voice dropping to that intimate, possessive growl. You are free from him, but you are not free from me. My offer stands, Alara, my condition. You stay here. You are mine to protect. He was offering me a golden cage in place of a rusty one. But the keeper of this new cage was a man haunted by a need to protect, not a desire to destroy. It was a twisted, terrifying choice. A life of fear and abuse with Julian, a life of uncertainty and running on my own, or a life of confined safety with this dangerous, broken man. I need to think, I said, my mind a maelstrom of fear and gratitude, of revulsion and a strange, burgeoning attraction. "Take all the time you need," he said, standing up. "You are not my prisoner, but do not mistake this house for a hotel. The doors are not locked. You can walk out of them whenever you choose. But the moment you step off this property, my protection ends. And I cannot guarantee what the world or Julian will do to you once you are out there, alone." He left me then with the wine and the view and the impossible choice. I walked to the window and pressed my hand against the cool glass. The city lights twinkled below, a sea of a million lives, a million stories. I had thought I wanted to be one of them, anonymous and free. But as I looked down at that indifferent world, I realized Dante was right. I was a target, a lamb who had run from one wolf straight into the path of another. But this second wolf, he wasn't trying to devour me. He was trying to put me in his den, to stand guard and snarl at anything that came near. It was a frightening, seductive proposition, and as the night deepened, I feared I was already beginning to consider it. The next day passed in a suspended state of anxiety. Dante was gone, having left before sunrise. The house was run by a silent, efficient staff who moved like ghosts, anticipating my needs before I voiced them. They brought me food, fresh clothes, books. They were polite but distant, their eyes revealing nothing. I was a guest of honor and a specimen under glass. I spent the day exploring my immediate surroundings, the suite and the grand hallway, never daring to venture further down. The silence of the mansion was unnerving. It was the silence of a place that was always prepared, always waiting. It hummed with a latent energy, a coiled power that emanated from the man who owned it, even in his absence. My thoughts were a tangled mess. Every time I thought of Julian, my stomach clenched with the old, familiar fear. The relief that Dante promised was a powerful lure. But the price was my freedom. I would be trading one form of ownership for another. Yet, Dante's possession felt different. It was rooted in a darkness I recognized, a past trauma that drove him. Julian's cruelty was born of weakness and entitlement. Dante's possessiveness was born of a fierce, desperate need to control his environment, to prevent a past tragedy from ever repeating itself. It was twisted, but it wasn't sadistic. Late in the afternoon, the oppressive silence was broken. I was standing by the window in my room when I saw a car approaching up the long driveway. It wasn't one of the black SUVs. It was a flashy, obnoxious sports car, blood red and loud. My blood ran cold. I knew that car. It was Julian's. Cries Sal. My immediate instinct was to hide, to run. But where could I go? I was trapped. I watched, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, as the car screeched to a halt at the front steps. Julian climbed out, his face a thundercloud of fury. He was followed by two large, thuggish-looking men, who were clearly not his usual golfing buddies. He stormed toward the front door, but the door never opened for him. Marco was suddenly there, standing on the top step, blocking the entrance. He looked calm, immovable, his simple black suit a stark contrast to Julian's flashy attire. Even from this distance, I could see the tension in the air. Julian was shouting, his arms waving wildly. The two thugs behind him took a step forward, but Marco didn't even flinch. He simply stood there, a bulwark of quiet authority. Then, from a side road I hadn't noticed before, two of Dante's black SUVs appeared, gliding to a silent stop behind Julian's car, boxing him in. Men in dark suits emerged from the vehicles, their movements economical and precise. They didn't draw weapons, but they didn't need to. Their presence was a weapon in itself. Julian's shouting faltered. He looked from Marco to the men surrounding him, his blustering rage deflating into visible fear. He had come here for a confrontation, expecting to bully his way through to me. He had brought muscle, but he had brought a knife to a gunfight he didn't even know was happening. Marco said something to him, his voice too low for me to hear, his expression unchanging. Julian's face paled. He sputtered for a moment, then seemed to shrink into himself. He cast one last, hateful look up at the house up at my window, and I instinctively recoiled from the glass. Then he turned, scrambled back into his car, and sped away, his hired muscle following meekly behind. The SUVs remained for a moment, before melting back into the landscape as silently as they had appeared. Marco watched them go, then turned and re-entered the house. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 5 minutes. It was a swift, silent, and utterly overwhelming show of force. It wasn't a battle. It was an extermination of a threat. And it was all done to protect me. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. I sank onto the sofa, my legs trembling. Dante hadn't even been here. And yet his power, his reach, was absolute. The message was clear. Julian could not get to me. No one could. Dante returned well after dark. I heard the faint sound of his car on the gravel driveway. I had been waiting, pacing the plush carpet of my room, my nerves stretched taut. When he entered the suite, he looked tired. There was a new tension in the lines around his eyes, and a small, almost invisible cut on his cheekbone. "He came here," I said, the words rushing out. "Julian, he came here." Dante nodded, shrugging off his suit jacket and tossing it onto a chair. "I know," Marco informed me. "It has been taken care of." "Taken care of?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. "What does that mean?" "I saw what happened. Your men." "My men ensured he understood the boundaries," Dante said, his voice flat. He walked over to the small bar in the corner and poured himself a glass of whiskey. He downed it in one smooth motion. "He will not be coming back." "But that's not all, is it?" I pressed, sensing there was more. The tension in him was not just from Julian's pathetic display at his gates. Something else happened. He turned to face me, his dark eyes shadowed with a weariness that went bone deep. "Your fiancé's family, in their desperation, made some foolish alliances. They owe money not just to legitimate banks, but to people who are less forgiving, people who are my rivals." A cold dread seeped into the room. This was bigger than Julian, bigger than me. I was just a pawn in a much larger, deadlier game. "By taking you," Dante continued, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "By interfering in the Van Croy's affairs, I have sent a message. I have trespassed on what they consider their territory. They have responded." "Responded how?" I whispered. "They have made it clear that they now consider you a liability, my liability. My weakness." He took a step toward me, his expression grim. "Which means my previous assessment was incorrect. You are no longer just a target for Julian. You are a target for them. And they are far more dangerous." The gilded cage suddenly felt like a necessary fortress. The world outside, which I had been so desperate to run into, was now filled with faceless, deadly threats. My small, personal crisis had escalated into a war between criminal empires, and I was standing at the epicenter. Quote, "So your protection," I said, the realization dawning on me. It's not just from Julian anymore, it's from them. From your world. "Yes," he said, his gaze intense, "which is why you cannot leave. Not now. To step outside this house would be a death sentence. I can protect you in here. I cannot protect you out there." His justification was complete: confinement. My confinement was no longer a possessive whim, it was a matter of life and death. He had not engineered this threat, but he was using it to solidify his hold on me, to make my choice for me. I was trapped, not just by his wealth and his will, but by a very real, very deadly danger. "What are you going to do?" I asked, my fear for myself mingling with a strange, new fear for him. He looked tired, burdened. This was my fault. I had brought this trouble to his door. "I am going to do what I always do," he said, his voice regaining its steel edge. "I am going to eliminate the threat." He walked past me and went into his own suite, which I now realized adjoined mine through a discreet door I hadn't noticed before. He returned a moment later, shrugging on a different jacket, one made of soft, dark leather. The tired man was gone, replaced by the predator. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice small. "To finish this," he said simply. He paused at the door to my suite. "Marco will be outside your door, as will 2 other men. You will not be left alone for a second. Do not open the door for anyone but me. Do you understand?" I nodded numbly. He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes searching my face. Then he gave a curt nod and was gone. The door clicked shut behind him, and the silence that descended was heavier, more menacing than before. I was safe inside these walls, protected by an army of silent men in suits. But Dante, the man who had appointed himself my protector, was out there in the darkness, walking into a war that had been started because of me. And for the first time, I wasn't just afraid for myself, I was terrified for him. The night was the longest of my life. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sit still. I paced the length of the suite, the soft carpet wearing a path under my restless feet. Every distant sound from outside a car engine, a siren, the wind rustling through the trees made me jump. I imagined Dante in the city's dark underbelly, facing down his faceless rivals. I pictured him hurt, or worse. The thought was a physical pain, a sharp, unexpected ache in my chest. When had this happened? When had this dangerous stranger, this captor, become someone whose safety I cared about? I tried to rationalize it. I was grateful, of course. He had saved me from Julian. He was protecting me. My concern was simply a natural response to that, a form of Stockholm syndrome, perhaps. But it felt like more. I kept replaying our conversation, the story of his mother, the raw pain in his eyes. I had seen the man behind the mask, the wounded boy who had forged himself into an unbreakable weapon to ensure he would never be helpless again. And that man, not the cold-hearted mafia boss, was the one I was worried about. Just before dawn, I heard the sound I had been waiting for, the quiet crunch of tires on the driveway. I rushed to the window, my heart in my throat. It was his car. He was back. I watched as he got out, his movements stiff. In the dim pre-dawn light, I could see that his left arm was cradled against his body, and the sleeve of his white shirt was stained dark with what could only be blood. My breath hitched. He was hurt. I ran to the door of the suite, my hand hesitating on the handle. He had told me not to open it for anyone but him. I waited, my ear pressed. Against the cool wood, I heard his footsteps in the hall, heavy and weary. They stopped outside my door. There was a long pause, and then the softest of knocks. I threw the door open. He stood there, looking even more exhausted than when he left. His face was pale beneath his tan, and there was a tight, grim line around his mouth. His eyes, dark and shadowed, found mine, and I saw a flicker of surprise in them. "You're hurt," I breathed, my eyes fixed on his arm. "It's nothing," he rasped, trying to brush past me. But he swayed on his feet, and I reached out instinctively to steady him. My hand closed around his good arm, and I felt the hard muscle tense beneath his shirt. "It is not nothing," I insisted, my nursing instincts kicking in, overriding my fear. "Let me see." I guided him into the suite and toward the sitting area, pushing him gently down onto the sofa. Zang. He sank into the cushions with a weary sigh, his head falling back. He looked vulnerable, human. I knelt in front of him and carefully took his injured arm. The sleeve of his shirt was soaked through. "We need to get this off," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Power. And I need a first aid kit." He just looked at me, his expression unreadable. Marco is not a nurse." I cut him off. "I am. Now, where is a first aid kit?" He gestured vaguely toward the bathroom. "In the cabinet. I found a comprehensive medical kit, far more equipped than a standard household one, and returned with it, along with a bowl of warm water and some clean towels." I worked quickly and efficiently, cutting away the ruined fabric of his shirt. The wound was a deep gash along his forearm, bleeding sluggishly. It was clean, almost surgical. "A knife wound," declined. "It needs stitches," I said, my voice clinical as I began to clean the wound. He hissed in pain as the antiseptic touched his raw flesh, but he didn't pull away. He just watched me, his gaze intense and unwavering as I worked. "I can do it," he said, his voice strained. "Don't be ridiculous," I murmured, concentrating on my task. "Hold still." I found a suture kit and, with steady hands that surprised even myself, I began to stitch the wound closed. My fingers moved with a practiced confidence I hadn't felt in years. In this one, small way, I was no longer helpless. I was the one in control, the one providing care. He was the one who was vulnerable. The power dynamic between us had shifted, if only for a moment. As I worked, the silence stretched, filled only by the soft sounds of my work and our quiet breathing. The heat from his body radiated toward me, and the scent of him cologne, whiskey, and the sharp metallic tang of blood filled my senses. I was intensely aware of his closeness, of the hard planes of his chest, and the strength in the arm beneath my hands. When I was finished, I bandaged the wound neatly and sat back on my heels. "Done," I said softly. "You should have a doctor look at it." "You are better than any doctor I know," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Fathers." He flexed his fingers, his eyes never leaving my face. "Thank you, Alara." I looked up and met his gaze. Powers. The weariness was still there, but something else had joined it. A warmth, a gratitude that seemed to go beyond the simple act of dressing a wound. In that moment, the barriers between us captor and captive, protector and protected, seemed to dissolve, leaving just a man and a woman in a quiet room at dawn. "Is it over?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The threat?" He nodded slowly. "It's over. Both of them. The Van Croy family has accepted a very generous offer to relocate, permanently, and my rivals have been reminded of the cost of trespassing. You are safe now." Completely. The relief was so immense it made me dizzy. It was finally, truly, over. Julian was gone. The faceless enemies were gone. I was free from the fear that had haunted me for months, and it was all because of this man, this violent, complicated, wounded man who sat before me. He reached out with his good hand and gently touched my cheek, his thumb stroking my skin. The gesture was tentative, almost hesitant, as if he were afraid I would pull away. I didn't. I leaned into his touch, my eyes fluttering shut for a moment. "Alara," he murmured, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't decipher. I opened my eyes. He was looking at me with an intensity that stole my breath, a raw hunger and a profound tenderness warring in his dark gaze. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to retreat. I stayed where I was, kneeling before him, trapped not by his walls or his guards, but by a force far more powerful, my own unwilling desire. His lips met mine. The kiss was not rough or demanding, as I might have expected. It was soft, searching, and filled with a desperate, pent-up longing. It was a kiss that spoke of gratitude, of relief, of a connection forged in violence and fear. I responded instinctively, my hands coming up to rest on his chest, my lips parting under his. It was a surrender, a complete and total capitulation not to his power, but to the undeniable bond that had formed between us in the crucible of the last 2 days. When he finally pulled back, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. "I have never," he began, his voice raspy, "felt for anyone what I felt when I saw you in that street. It was as if the world shifted on its axis. And in the past 2 days, seeing your strength, your fire, you are not like anyone I have ever known." He pulled back enough to look me in the eyes, his expression deadly serious. "I know this is not how things are supposed to begin. I know I have taken you, kept you here against your will. But I am not my father, Elara. I will never be him. I will protect you, not cage you." He stood up then, pulling me to my feet with him. He led me to the main door of the suite, the one that led out into the hallway and the world beyond. He opened it. The morning light was beginning to filter into the grand hallway. The house was silent. "It is as I told you," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "The threats are gone. You are free to go. I will have Marco drive you wherever you want. I will give you enough money to start a new life, a safe life, anywhere in the world. You never have to see me again." He stepped back, leaving the doorway clear. It was my choice, the choice I had thought I wanted more than anything. Freedom. I could walk out that door and never look back. I could be anonymous again, untethered, alone. I looked at the open door, at the path to a life of quiet normalcy. Then I looked back at Dante. He stood there, his injured arm in a makeshift sling, his face pale, his dark eyes watching me with a raw vulnerability that broke my heart. He was giving me the one thing he had never had, a choice. And in that moment, I knew. I knew that the quiet, normal life I thought I wanted would feel empty. It would be a life without this intensity, this danger, this all-consuming sense of being protected, of being seen, a life without him. Slowly, deliberately, I reached out and pushed the heavy door shut. It closed with a soft, definitive click. I turned back to him. A wave of emotions washed over his face, disbelief, hope, and a profound, bone-deep relief that mirrored my own. I had made my choice. I was not a victim. I was not a captive. I was a woman who had looked at 2 different prisons and chosen the one that felt, impossibly, like a sanctuary. "I'm staying," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I'm staying with you." A slow smile spread across his face, and this time, it was not the dangerous, predatory smile of before. It was a genuine, breathtaking smile that reached his eyes, transforming his harsh features into something beautiful. It was the smile of the boy he must have been, the boy who had just been given a reason to hope again. He crossed the room in 2 strides and swept me into his arms, his good arm wrapping around me, holding me tight against his chest, as if he would never let me go. I buried my face in his shoulder, inhaling his scent, feeling the steady beat of his heart against my cheek. I was home. It was a strange, terrifying, and exhilarating thought. This fortress was my home. This dangerous man was my home. He pulled back slightly and looked down at me, his eyes shining. You will not regret this, Alara. I swear it. He reached into the pocket of his trousers and pulled out a small velvet box. My breath caught. It was too soon. It couldn't be. This is not what you think, he said quickly, as if reading my mind. He opened the box. Inside, nestled on the black velvet, was not an engagement ring. It was a simple, elegant platinum ring, set with a single, flawless sapphire, the color of a deep twilight sky. It was old, an heirloom. This was my mother's. It was the one thing of her own that my father never touched, the one thing he let her keep. She gave it to me the week before she died. She told me to give it to the woman I would spend my life protecting, the woman I would love not as a possession, but as a partner. Tears welled in my eyes as he took the ring from the box. He took my left hand and slid it onto my finger. It was a perfect fit. I am not asking you to marry me, he said, his voice thick with emotion as he held my hand in his. Not yet. I am making you a promise. A vow. I will spend the rest of my life protecting you, cherishing you, and proving that I am worthy of the choice you just made. You are mine, Alara Vance. Not my property, my partner, my equal, and he, brought my hand to his lips and kissed the ring, his eyes never leaving mine, am yours. The sun was now streaming through the windows, bathing the room in a warm, golden light. The ghosts of the night were gone, chased away by the dawn of a new, uncertain, but hopeful day. I looked from the ring on my finger to the face of the man who had put it there, the Mafia boss, my savior, my captor, my protector. He was all of those things. He was my future. He led me to the vast windows that overlooked the city. We stood there together, his arm wrapped securely around my waist, my head resting on his shoulder. The city below, once a symbol of everything I was running from, now looked different. It looked like a kingdom, his kingdom, and now, ours. The fear that had been my constant companion for so long was finally gone, replaced by a sense of peace that felt as vast and profound as the sky above. I was no longer running. I had finally found a place to stand my ground, and I would stand it with him. The road ahead would be dangerous, I knew. His world was not a safe one, but with his arm around me, with the weight of his promise on my finger, I felt safer than I had ever been in my entire life. I had stopped a stranger in the street, desperate for an escape, and had found a destiny I never could have imagined.